Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to present your design. So, you're going to need to be the creative, compelling Hollywood director. You're going to come up with all the best shots. I just want to give you a few tips on ways to use some effects in Lumion, a few shortcuts of how to, expedite adding effects and copying and pasting or loading effects, and also just a few pointers along the way about what makes a good animation and a compelling presentation. So it's important to note that we've got our model all set up. So we've got our proposed conditions imported, our existing conditions imported, and our site imported. Those are three separate models that were pulled in, and each one of those is on a different layer. That way we have full control over whether we're showing the site or with existing or proposed. Also, we can make our site as mark it as terrain. So we did that in the last tutorial. So now for this one though, let's hop in and let's start with something easy. That's going to be in photo mode. We want to create a view that looks like this. So here's a nice compelling view. That looks pretty sweet, right? So what we can do though to get there, I've already added a bunch of these different effects. So you can always grab this effect. This is in your files. Like if I wanted to add another effect another view that looks just like this one, maybe I come over here and kind of scoot in a little bit closer. And let me get on this camera because that one doesn't have any effects. Effects can kind of slow things down a little bit. So this way, maybe I find some kind of cool, compelling view like this. I don't know, I guess whatever looks good. Looks good. All right, I'll take a snapshot. Now, it's really easy to build your own effect stack, and then you just go to File and choose Load. And when I load that, I can choose from either a photo reel, and this is something I've already created, and choose Open. And it's just going to drop all those same effects right in there. So I want to show you how to do that and how to save one of those effect stacks out, and also how to add your own effects. So let's do that. Let's go to the next empty camera here. And let's say that I want to add some effects to this. I'll just go in here and let's say here's our next view is going to maybe drop down just a touch like that, just to catch the bottom of the falls there, or the top of the falls. And I'll take a snapshot. All right, so now I've added a camera shot from this angle, but I don't have any effects added. So I click on New Effect, and I can go and add a world effect like sun. That's an easy one. The sun height, I can set it to be more of like a nighttime render. I can choose the sun heading, maybe bring this up a bit. Choose the sun heading, something that gets some more kind of dynamic shadows happening. Let's see, then another important one, really important effect for any rendering, any still rendering, any animation, it's reflections. That is a really important one. There's some effects that I just add every single time that are included in kind of my base effect stack. So let me show you about reflections and why those are important. Reflections are under World Effects, that first one, and here's reflection. Now, the reason that reflections are important, look at this, look at the reflections that are happening on all of my glass, and you can see how they're just not that good. It's basically like this reflection ball that's dropped in the middle of your model, takes pictures in every direction, and that's what it uses for reflections. Now, that does make things move really fast. I gotta get that tree out of there, huh? We'll fix that in a moment. But it makes things really fast when the reflections are represented like this. But if I turn on speed ray reflections, that can help. Preview quality, I just want to see where I'm at if I dial that up. So it really doesn't fix these overall reflections here. What I really need to do is click on this Edit tab, and then I need to go down here and click the plus sign. And what I do is I add reflection planes. So any material that has a reflective property is now, if it has a reflection plane, it's going to have true reflections. So I'll add one there, and then I'll click on the plus sign, and I'll add one here. All right, I'll click on the plus sign, and I'll add one. Let's see, we'll go kind of closer here. We don't have to do them all, but you can see that really, if I go to OK, click on the checkbox to say back. Now, check it out. See how those reflections are not so great, whereas these reflections are like a perfect mirror. So that's the idea, is that on every view that you create, you do want to add that reflection effect and set up your reflection planes. That way you'll get the best reflections in all of your views. Don't rely on Lumion just to have those reflections. Speed ray reflections do help a lot with all the little subtle reflections, but you do need to add the reflection effect and then assign those reflection planes. Keep in mind that I think you only get like 10 of them, so sometimes they do need to change. Like if you orbit to the other side, you're going to want to add the reflection planes over there and delete the ones that are not in view. So keep that in mind as you go. So once you have some effects loaded and set up on here, you can go to this top wrench and click on that and go to File and choose Save. So once you have an effect stack that you like, click on that wrench, go to File and choose Save. And then I like to save things as either like photoreal or sketchy, or maybe you've got different like old like vintage film, or just different styles. That's what an effect stack is all about. So once you get a look that you like, save it. That way you can load it really quick every time. All right, so that's where you'd save it. And I'm not going to overwrite these, but what I am going to do then is just click on this view, and we're just going to load an effect stack. So I'll go to File and choose Load, and we can go to Photoreal. There we go. So I've already got like my logo on there. I've got everything all set up. You can see we've got Autumn Generator turned on. We've got Hide Layer. Hide Layer is an important one. Maybe we should talk about that one briefly. Like for instance, see, this is where you get into a little bit of trickiness when you're working with these different layers the way that we do. So your default state in Lumion should be that all layers are turned on before you go to render. So as I'm working, I'll turn certain layers on, off, and kind of mess with things. But before I go to render, I want all of my layers turned on. Now that means that I'm going to get this Z fighting, and you can see that kind of flickering here. So what that means is that when I go and I set up in photo mode, and I say like, all right, here's my, here's, let's see, I think this one would be the sure thing. I think I've already got hide layer. Let me just start a new one here. So when you're adding a new view, so when I go to this view, you can see that I've got my existing model turned on, and I've got my proposed. So really what needs to happen is in every single view that I set up, I need to choose whether or not I'm going to hide layers 2 or 3. So 2 is existing, 3 is proposed. So I'm going to add an effect. This is going to be an object effect, and I'm going to choose hide layer. So I'm going to choose to hide layer 2. I can either slide this bar to hide the layer and get it to layer 2, or another easy way is if you just double click and then you can backspace and type 2. That way you don't have to kind of slide around. So anyway, I want to hide layer 2 every single time. So you can see like on these guys, I have hide layer and layer 2 is selected. And if I were to slide that around, you can see that it starts to hide different layers. And we get in here where we're hiding our trees and our everything else. So we want to hide layer 2. Now that way it makes for a little bit more of a complicated model or complex model, but it gives us the opportunity to do some really cool stuff when it comes to fading back and forth between existing conditions and proposed conditions. All right, so let's take a look at that. Let me go into our movie mode and check this out. I've made this movie already. It's got that grainy film. It's kind of slowly panning. We do a lens blur, and then it switches over to our proposed conditions. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing. I mean, we've got all these different effects going on. We've got our clouds moving, we've got our autumn generator turned on, and we've got analog color lab, depth of field, lots of stuff happening. And we're keyframing. So I want to show you how to do this. So basically what it's doing is if I look at this clip, as it scrolls along, we have our camera shake, which has film age on it, and we've got all these things going on to make it look like kind of a vintage film. And then we go into our depth of field, gets increased drastically, and you can see right there is where we keyframed which layer to hide. And then we zap back into focus, and our new building is in place. All right, so let me show you how to create that effect. I'm going to just start with go to scene 2, and I'm going to click on record. All right, so let's say I want to just kind of position myself like right here and take a snapshot. And then I'm just going to move in a subtle way over here and hit snapshot that. Now keep in mind that anytime, any animation, I can tell you that slower is always better. So right now this clip is at like 4.2 seconds. I'm just gonna make it like, I don't know, let's just go with like 9 seconds. because slower is always better. I promise that. Okay, so that's got this kind of nice subtle movement here. The only thing though, I might want to just kind of scoot this down. If I hold the space bar and tap on E a little bit, I can just kind of move that down. That looks pretty good right there. Alright, so now we're just kind of floating up, and we'll have some good depth of field trees always in our view. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So we got our clip, we can say OK. So this clip right here has no effects applied to it, and when I click on play, that's what it looks like. Alright, so that's pretty easy, but now let's get the first effect applied, and I think that's going to be to add the effect to this clip, hide layer. Keep in mind that if I were to click on this entire movie, I can add effects to the entire movie. I just want to click on my clip, and we're going to add the effect under Objects, Hide Layer, and we're going to hide a layer. Now, I'm going to hit pause because that way I can click and drag on my timeline. What I want to do is hide a layer. I don't want to hide the site. I want to hide either layer 2 or 3. So for the first part of this film, I want it to be existing. And then as I get to the middle of my clip, that's where I want to make my transition into proposed. So let's see. So when I start here, we're going to start at the very beginning, and we're hiding layer 3, which is our proposed. Let me keyframe that. All right, so now as I move along and we get to like, say 4.5 seconds, I'm going to add, or let's say 4 seconds, close to 4. We're going to add, no, I'm sorry, yeah, 4.5. We're going to add a keyframe. We're going to scoot just a little bit and add another keyframe. Close to 5. And now on this one, we're going to hide layer 2. Like that. And then as we finish the movie, that's on. Let me go to my entire movie, and we're going to hide this in and out because that's going to kind of make things a little bit distracting as we go through this clip. So this way, see, it no longer blurs. I just want to see it goes from layer 2 to 3. 2 to 3. So that's kind of an easy thing to do, but that's very drastic, right? So we do need to come up with a better way of transitioning there. All right, so to do that, let's add another effect called, we're going to add an effect called depth of field. That's under camera. So depth of field, we'll add that. Now, for this depth of field effect, we're going to need to do some more keyframing just like we did. We can't use that autofocus. That's new in version 6, which autofocus is great, but we do need to kind of change that different focal length depending on where we're at in the timeline. So again, on this clip, as I move along, I want to start out with our depth of field. The amount is probably going to be a lot. I want to do our foreground, background. I think 0.5 is good, and let's adjust the distance just to get our building in view there. All right, so that looks pretty good. Like right now, this foreground is blurred, and as I move along, I'm going to want to blur my building when I get over to here. All right, so we've got our foreground, our focus distance. This stuff, I want to keyframe all this stuff. And we'll also keyframe the amount. Now, as I move along, and when I get to like, let's see, I'm probably going to goof this up. I'm trying to do this my first try. So let's see. I'm going to add a keyframe a little bit before this, and I want to keyframe all this stuff in. Okay? So that way, from this point to this point is always maintaining the exact same settings, right? But as soon as I get here, I want to change. So I can always like use my little keyframe thing here. I want these properties now as I move from here to like right before my transition, like right when I get to here, I want another keyframe. So basically I want that building to go out of focus. So I want to dial up my focal distance needs to come to the front. So our trees come into play. And we'll just do the blur. You choose whether you want to blur the foreground or the background. So we're going to blur the background in this case. Like that. Okay? So let's see what we've done here. Now, as I slide along here on our timeline, so the trees in the foreground are blurred, and then right when I get to this point, it starts to blur our building. Now, as I move along and get to this next point, see our building switched, and now we want to blur back in. So I'm going to go back to the amount, foreground, background, and focus distance. And we're going to blur the focus distance. We'll go back to our building. We'll go with foreground and background, and we can dial up the amount a bit, like that. All right, so now as we go through this timeline, it goes blurred on our foreground. The building starts to go out of focus. We switch over, and then blur back. So let me see here. Let's look at what we've done here. So I'll go here. We've got foreground, and then we go to the next keyframe. That's going to put, let's see, on this keyframe, our foreground background changes. And the amount should be maybe a little bit more too. I want it to be like really kind of distorted there. And then we'll go to the next keyframe, and on that one, see, on that keyframe, I think we do still want it blurred, actually. So I'm going to go back to this. Let's see, these settings are kind of in line here. And so on this one, I want to do the same. So we'll just kind of keep those similar there. And our focus distance should be up front, something like that. All right. Now, as we move along on our timeline, if we go to the next one, yeah, see, that's we need one more. So now as we move a little bit further along, when we get to here, that's where I want to bring things back into focus, like that. Now, we're going to go back to kind of the middle. We're going to dial down the amount, and our focus distance will go back to kind of the front of our building there. So now we've got, you know, these trees in the foreground and the background are just a little bit blurred, but our building is truly in focus. So now you can see as we go through, we go from existing conditions, we blur, switch, and bring it back into focus. So that's kind of cool. All right. So I like that. Let's watch it in real time. All right, so we're going to hit back. You can see how slower is definitely better, nice and subtle. And let's see what it looks like. And that's kind of different. You know, you might goof around with the different settings, and you know, you can come up with some pretty cool ways to transition and make this happen. But what's important here is you're really understanding keyframing of these different effects. Let me add one more effect here. I'm going to add another one here. We're going to call this one under weather. We're going to add our clouds. Now, as I'm scrolling along on my timeline and all this stuff is happening, I also want to keyframe my cloud position. So at the beginning, I'll say here's the clouds, and then as I go to the very end, I'll say I'll add a keyframe and my cloud position changes. So now as I go through here, you can see our clouds are moving. You know, we've still got all of our stuff kind of blurring in, looking good. All right, now one other effect. Let's just take this to the max. You know, you can really go nuts with all these different effects in Lumion and come up with some really cool stuff. So I want to use an effect called camera shake. Now, this will allow you to kind of give like that effect of like walking along a street. It gives just a little bit of a subtle bounce to the camera, but there's also a slider on there for film age. So let's do that. Let's dial up the film age for the existing condition so it looks like a vintage film, and then we're going to turn it off when we snap to proposed. So what we'll do is on this guy here, we're going to add the effect. This is a camera effect called handheld camera. And as I'm scrolling along, my handheld camera on this one, I do need to adjust my focal length so I'm kind of back to where I was. Like that, I think. Let's just check that. So there's our focal length is set up. Yeah, that looks good. That looks good. Okay, so on this guy, let me pause this. Our film age, we do want to dial that up. So film age is going to be really old. You know, we'll just make it like that. So like as it's going, you can see that you get all those little like lines kind of shooting across. Kind of makes it look like it's old, right? But as soon as we switch over to here, you know, when we switch to our new building, I don't want the film age to be showing up anymore. So really, I need it to go like right about to, you know, like right here, the film age should turn off. A precise way to get here is to go back to your hide layer keyframe, and you can see that on this keyframe it's on existing, on this one it's on new. So right when it gets to new is right where we want to add a keyframe for our film age, like that. And you know, actually I'm just going to go just a little bit back and add another. Let's see, we've got film age. We want to just kind of go back a touch, add a keyframe. So on this keyframe right here, film age is going to be off. On the one before, it's on. So now you can see that as I go along, you've got those kind of vertical lines and that like old look, and then right when it switches over, it comes into the future there with a nice crisp, clean look. All right, so old and new. Okay, so now the other thing we can do to kind of make this look old, you can really layer these effects and just, you know, build some really unique looks. Let's add another effect under Style. This one's called Analog Color Lab. So Analog Color Lab, as I'm moving along, you know, like on this first part, yes, I want the style to be, you know, like something, you know, maybe you go with like kind of a desaturated. Let's dial the amount up. We're just going to make it really drastic. Yeah, you could even like do like black and white maybe. I don't know. That could be kind of cool. And then it'll kind of blast into color for the new. Let's try it. You know, let me dial down the amount just a bit. And okay, so right here, the style, actually the style is not exactly what we care about. It's the amount. So right here, the amount is dialed up. And as I go along, right when I get over to here, I'm going to add an effect. Add a keyframe. And then here, we want to change it to the amount is off, like that. So now as we're going along, it's black and white, it's kind of grainy, and then it just kind of snaps into present day, like that. Sweet. All right, so let's run it full speed, see what that looks like. All right, so here's our grainy film, and very cool. All right, so at this point, I think you know, one thing you could do is click on the wrench and go to File and choose Save Effects, and you can save that effect. So whether you're working with still images or you're working with your animation effects, save those effect stacks and use them over and over. Like that process that I went through, you don't want to have to keep doing that. You don't want to have to keep on you know, adding effects manually like that. I mean, you'll have to tweak the keyframes and everything, but if you can just build some default effect stacks and use those over and over, you'll save yourself a ton of time. So anyway, in the next video, we're going to look at uploading, rendering and uploading and finishing your submittal to this Lumion summer competition.